Aviation was 20. So this is the last slide of, I think, chapter 3, which is the nervous system. I don't think we got a chance to go over that before we left. But I want to go over it quickly, and then we'll get into skeletal muscle. And the reason I am up here today is because I'm going to play some videos, which I think are outstanding videos. I'm not sure if you saw them with Dr. Murphy, but you may not have. You may have seen that. So let's talk the top panel here. The top panel is the somatic nervous system. First of all, how many people were at the research and exercise colloquium series on Friday? Raise your hand high. Excuse? Doing?
It's Dr. Ryan, so you can talk to him if you like.
Yeah, I'll tell him that. Watching a soccer tournament, is that required? Well, then you're not getting any bonus points. Come and fight with me. Carmen? Where were you on Friday? At home? Doing what? Interesting. Outstanding APSN representatives. So our boy, somebody here, his initials are LB, hung with the Beat Boys in his slide presentation. Did a pretty good job, don't you think?
Yeah.
For how we know him, right? Like if we knew what, yeah. I mean, our expectations were a lot lower going in there, and I think he really met our expectations. So no, I thought he did a good job. That's tough to get up there and talk with a bunch of PhD students and hold your own. I thought he did very well, so congratulations to Lance. Hopefully it goes as well with Dr. Clark, who knows what he's talking about, as opposed to the rest of us who didn't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, I won third place at a biomechanics conference 2 weeks ago.
But that's what I'm telling you, is we'll see about that one. So go in there with that attitude and you'll probably get your hat handed to you. So, no, and I thought Dustin did, but I'm his mentor, so that's okay. I'm supposed to say that about him. So, who cares about neck pressure, neck suction of women in the heat? Right? This guy does. That's who does. So. Cool. So, great job, guys. I thought you guys did exceptionally well. So, and for you, those that were there, I think, asked some questions. Austin, I know, asked a question. Anybody else? Noah, did you ask a question? Was it a good question?
Pretty good question. I thought it was a good question.
Who did you ask? Who?
Justin.
Justin's question? Yeah. Who did you ask? Austin. You had a couple. Yeah, follow-up.
Yes, everybody.
Yeah, he has a couple questions, follow-up questions. So I thought it was good. So, okay, finishing up the nervous system. So Lance, you're our somatic nervous system guy. Tell us a little bit about the somatic nervous system here towards the end.
Targets mainly skeletal muscle, stuff that voluntary actions.
Voluntary action. So far, so good. Okay. Neurotransmitter. We're going to talk about this more in detail in the next chapter. But it's going to be acetylcholine. Those neurons that are in the peripheral nervous system, in the somatic nervous system specifically, are heavily myelinated. So they're going to have a lot of myelin surrounding the axis of that neuron. Okay? And what's that for? Again, why do we want this axon to be myelinated?
So that the action potential can keep its strength and be transmitted quicker.
Correct. Both. Keep the strength and keep the action potential going down the axon fast. So each one of these spaces in the myelin sheath is called what?
Nodes of Ranvier.
Node of Ranvier, exactly. What are there in the nodes?
Say that again?
Say why are those nodes special compared to, let's say, the axon underneath the myelin
They are
sheath?
not
Channels
myelinated.
and transporters, though.
Say it louder, Austin.
So the channels and transporters are located.
So they have a high concentration of sodium potassium channels there, right? So that they can create electrical impulses underneath the axon, or underneath the myelin on that axon. There's less because we're really not conducting electrical action potentials at those areas. And again, if you see a picture in your textbook, it looks like it's jumping from. Let's see if this JIT stuff will work. Okay, that the action potential is jumping from here to here to here to here. Okay, it doesn't jump outside of the axon. Okay, yeah. Lance.
So people that have trouble with their myelin, like that don't have it or is degenerated, are those nodes like unaffected? Are they still the same?
So the nodes are still the same. They still have the same concentration of sodium potassium channels on there. And so the problem is the spacing of it doesn't allow the axon to not jump. You need that myelin there as a capacitance device so that it can jump from channel to channel. Once you expose that axon, now it has to travel down the entire exposed axon. So that's a great question. And so the problem that you get is, this again, what's the difference in this one right here? If we were to take the axon here, this is in the, for the somatic nervous system, it's in the peripheral nervous system. Demyelination in the central nervous system is what? It's the disease that we study in the lab.
Multiple sclerosis.
Right? Okay. And so what happens is, I don't think that's probably going to draw. Seems out it's an electronic marker, but we can try it. Okay. So now you have an axon here that has myelin. Okay, and now the immune system has stripped a section of that away. Okay, so you're still going to have nodes. Let's say it's stripped away 2 myelin bundles here. So that they're, the good news is this is no longer here. Okay. So Lance's question was, will you still have nodes? Correct, Lance?
Yes.
Yes.
So yes, you'll still have a high concentration. These markers are terrible bull. So what we got over here in the spare.
I think someone's pranking us. They're breaking our AC and leaving dry markers.
We could go all education style and get a piece of paper and tape it on the whiteboard and then write on the piece of paper. Which doesn't
Is
make,
that teaching naked?
I don't know what that is, but it doesn't. Look at this. Shooby dooby doo. Colors galore here. Which one you want? Purple? Woo! Okay, so the nodes are still there. So you're going to have sodium and potassium channels there. Now, under here, there's not as many. So you may have to produce some. Okay, so there's going to be a stimulus to say, hey, if this axon is going to function, we may have to make sodium potassium channels. And so when you do, they're not as efficient and they're not as good as these ones. Okay, and so now, in order for that impulse to travel down, do we now have erasers in this joint? What kind of education program is this? Usually, oh, here it is. Let me see something else right here. Sorry, it's your fault. So now this impulse has to travel down this entire, we'll use this brown color, section now. It has to travel down here. And as it does, it's going to get smaller and smaller because current's leaking out. Okay? And this node actually has what's called a safety factor, which is, we're going a little beyond this. But each of these nodes have to have a safety factor, which is the amount of current has to be greater than what is needed to fire that node. And so usually if you want a safety factor, it has to be above 1. That means that current coming down, the current that's coming down has to be greater than the current fired, which you would expect. But in normal fibers, the safety factor is about 4 to 5. So the current is 4 times as intense as needed to fire the nodes. But now it starts traveling down this axon and current's leaking out. If we drop down below that 1, okay, let's say it's 0.8, this node won't fire, okay? And so now the electrical impulse stops, which would be conduction block. The slowing that occurs because it has to travel down that exposed area of the axon is now called conduction slowing. So it takes more time to get it past that area than it would normally, okay? So, but it's still going to have the concentration of sodium potassium channels, but they may be affected how they're functioning based upon what's happening with that electrical current. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, now what do I do with the other marker? At some point, I'm going to write on that with the whiteboard one. Okay, so in the peripheral nervous system, somatic nervous system, again, what's different about this one usually? Somatic. compared to this?
Like with the pre-ganglionic fibers.
Could be the pre-gang, or do we control somatic versus autonomic?
There you go, voluntary, voluntary.
Yeah, so involuntary and voluntary is where I was going with that one, okay? So there could be differences exactly with their ability. If you look at this, what do you not notice? There is no ganglion with them, okay? Those motor neurons are gonna initiate contraction of skeletal muscle. So can these be really long neurons?
Somatic.
Yeah, they can be large, very large ones, especially the ones in the legs, okay? So, we'll talk about this in detail in chapter 5. So now we're on to the autonomic nervous system. We talked a little bit about parasympathetic and sympathetic. Dusty did a nice job talking about parasympathetic nervous system with regards to heating in female patients. So what was the question? So when it's not MS patients, when females are in normothermia, how do they control blood pressure changes?
Perfect.
Exactly right, mostly through cardiac output, okay, and increasing heart rate. And at rest, how do we increase heart rate, Austin?
At rest.
At rest. Because this goes right into what you guys are talking about in the lab, ECG-wise, right? So what's a normal resting heart rate for you guys? You calculated it in lab, right? 66. Okay. So how do we get a heartbeat of 66 if we're talking about controlling the heart and how it beats?
Parasympathetic.
Parasympathetic tone, right? So we're going to draw our heart here. And we have something here that sends electrical current down and across. The ventricles aren't quite big enough for me, so I'm going to add them, okay? So what is this right here? SA node. That's exactly right, okay? It's pacemaker of the heart, right? So if we want to increase or decrease heart rate at rest, what do we do? Change parasympathetic tone. So if we wanted to increase the heart rate, what would we do? Increase parasympathetic tone or decrease parasympathetic tone? So think about it as a brake. Parasympathetic is, if you want to slow heart rate, what are you going to do? Put on the brake, more parasympathetic tone, right? So if you want to increase heart rate, what do? Let off the brake, okay? But it only goes to a certain point. Why?
Sympathetic takes over.
Say it again.
Sympathetic activity takes over.
Sympathetic tactic. What ends up happening is you can only take off the brake so much, right? What's that point? Heart rate wise, that the brake is completely off parasympathetic wise. Anybody know?
By
100 beats per minute, okay? So if you just let the SA node beat on its own, it's going to beat 100 beats per minute. You want to slow it down, apply parasympathetic tone, fire parasympathetic neurons, decrease heart rate, okay? So at rest, these females had heart rates around what? It was about 70, wasn't it? Yeah, it was approximately 70 at rest, okay? So parasympathetic tone is slowing it down, okay? So if you want to increase heart rate due to a blood pressure challenge, increase cardiac output, what are you going to do? Let off the brake, heart rate's going to go up, okay? So that was in normal thermia. What did their heart rate go up to in heat stress?
20, 30.
I think 125, wasn't it? 126? Their heart rate is now 125 beats per minute. Okay? So if in rest they controlled a blood pressure challenge by increasing cardiac output, by decreasing parasympathetic tone to increase heart rate, are we going to be able to do that in a heat stress condition? Why not?
It's already above 100.
It's already above 100. We've already taken all of our parasympathetic withdrawal. It's already gone, right? So now we have 125. How are we getting 125? No, you mentioned it.
Sympathetic nervous.
So it's a sympathetic nervous system now that's driving heart rate in the heat stress condition, okay? And now they have blood pressure issues in that heat stress condition because maybe you can't control heart rate as well under sympathetic conditions compared to parasympathetic conditions, okay? Awesome. Dusty, you handled that question very well, too. Don't you think? Dr. Jacobs asked that question during the exam, okay? So, we're now talking about some of this with regards to sympathetic and parasympathetic. So let's start with parasympathetic. So, sympathetic nervous system, lightly myelinated preganglionic axon. Okay, so we're going to go into this presympathetic or parasympathetic ganglion. Neurotransmitter, there is acetylcholine. Okay, it's going to bind to receptors that are on an unmyelinated postganglionic axon. Ganglion, pre-ganglion, post. Okay, and then it's going to release acetylcholine. So its end neurotransmitter is acetylcholine, and it's going to have the effects positive, minus, depending on what we're looking at. In this case, maybe we want to decrease heart rate, so we're going to increase parasympathetic firing. You're going to bind to those receptors, and it's going to slow heart rate. Okay? Now, the sympathetic nervous system has two, and it's related to what we talked about in hormones in regards to the stress response. Short-term stress response and long-term stress response. Okay? So let's talk about this one. Top one is, we have our sympathetic preganglionic axon, lightly myelinated, okay, goes into the sympathetic ganglion, releases acetylcholine, okay? So the the ganglionic neurotransmitter for both parasympathetic and sympathetic is what? Acetylcholine, okay? So at the ganglion, using the same neurotransmitter, okay? Where it changes now is acetylcholine is going to bind to the unmyelinated postganglionic sympathetic fiber, and it's going to release norepinephrine as its neurotransmitter. Okay? And so this would be the neurohormone that we talk about. It doesn't write very well. Okay? It's going to have mostly stimulatory effects, specifically on heart rate, okay, and vasodilation of the blood vessels, bronchodilation, okay. But we also have presympathetic fibers, preganglionic fibers, that release acetylcholine to the adrenal medulla, okay. So acetylcholine is released, binds to receptors in the adrenal medulla, and then we get epinephrine and norepinephrine that are circulated through the bloodstream. Okay? So these catecholamines are fast-acting, both sides, but which one's faster, you think? Neuro, or if you're releasing it from the adrenal medulla? Why?
Nerve on nerve.
Nerve on nerve.
Go through secondary.
Exactly. So this releases acetylcholine, causes a response in this neuron, releases norepinephrine, has an effect on tissue. This neuron, preganglionic axon, acts directly upon the adrenal medulla. Okay? Now you have to, it's going to secrete norepinephrine, and now we have to get it to the tissue through the bloodstream. Okay? So we've added an extra step when we go to the adrenal medulla. Okay? So why do we have that? Why have the adrenal medulla in there? Two things. Neurons don't release epinephrine, okay? And what's the other one? Yeah, you probably don't produce enough norepinephrine from neurons to make all of this go specifically during exercise, okay? So you're going to need a bigger pot to work with in regards to the amount of catecholamines that you need, okay? So any questions on this?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm unmyelinated postganglionic axons. I imagine that there are more sodium potassium channels associated that have not be myelinated.
So now, exactly right. So Austin's talking about, is neural transmission going to be different here and here compared to something that has myelin in it? What's your answer, Austin? Yes. Okay. So now you're going to have the impulse is going to have to travel down this entire axon, okay, in order for it to get to where it needs to go. So that could slow nerve traffic down a little bit. But we're talking, when we talk slow, we're talking obviously milliseconds, right? So there's not going to be a problem with that, with anything. Norepinephrine, acetylcholine, okay? Parasympathetic is acetylcholine, and norepinephrine is the sympathetic one. Questions about this? we're going to talk about this one in detail in about 2 seconds, okay? All right, we're off to skeletal muscle. These slides are up on the, what's it called? Canvas? Also, good news is I found something out about Canvas. So one of my students from 3 semesters ago wanted access to the videos that were on Canvas when she took the class. And so apparently, news to me is when you log into Canvas, you can log into past courses and those things are already they're there. So if Dr. Murphy does she use Canvas?
Yes.
So anything that she put on there should be available. I don't think it goes away, which is pretty cool. Is that true?
Yeah, likewise.
Is it?
You go upload the entire course.
So if you get into graduate school or you move away from us and you want to get some stuff, log back into Canvas. Especially if you graduate, I think you keep your SMU email address forever, don't you? Now, I don't think it was like that when I first got here, but I know that's the way it is now. So any questions on chapter 4? Okay. So I think this text was a little weird because it has skeletal muscle as the first chapter. It's really hard to understand skeletal muscle contraction if you don't have an understanding about some of the other things, specifically hormones and the nervous system. It's going to be a little harder for you to understand skeletal muscle if you drop right into a skeletal muscle contraction. Okay? So these first slides that we're going to go over, why is this not going the right way? Are all review from anatomy and physiology. You should know that there are a lot of skeletal muscles in the body. Is that correct? True or false? Yes. What do? We know most of it's about movement, okay, locomotion, okay? Some of it's about postural support, which technically is locomotion if you think about it. It's keeping you upright. And this one, lovely if you're a thermal regulation guy. When's the last time you guys shivered? Wasn't today in this classroom. So maybe it was a little colder outside. You probably did it when you were biathloning, is that correct?
No, those kilometers.
Yeah, so because you're warm, so you probably won't get to that. So the only person that probably has really experienced shivering to an extent is probably Hannah, because you're from Canada. It snows there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Where are you from in Canada?
Nova Scotia.
Yeah, Nova Scotia. So you have snow boots, snow pants, long underwear, a parka, some kind of face covering, mittens. Yeah, all of those things. Why do you have all those things, Hannah? Because you die if you didn't, right? No one would live in Nova Scotia. That's pretty close to the Arctic Circle up there, isn't it? Nova Scotia. Closer than Dallas.
Yeah.
I mean, it's close to Iceland, isn't it? Nova Scotia? Geographically.
Yeah.
Close.
It's like close to the U.S. border.
They don't even know where Canada's at. So if we're talking Iceland and Greenland, that's impressive.
Really?
So when you're in Nova Scotia, the closest place where you can party is Reykjavik in Iceland, right?
Yeah.
I hear they party hard. I have some Icelandic vodka in my office if things go bad for a day. Kenzie Scoville, do you know Kenzie? You know of her? She used to play soccer at SMU. So history is doomed to repeat itself if you don't know. She went and played professionally in Iceland, and so brought me back a little thing of Icelandic vodka. It's for washing your palate down after you've eaten fermented whale fat. Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure how potent this is, but I'm almost positive that fermented whale fat is probably not delicious, and probably leaves maybe a little bit of an aftertaste in your mouth, so that you need to have some kind of antiseptic that probably washes that out of your mouth. So, but it's there in case I get in trouble. In case I have a bad day, boom, drown there. A couple shots of Icelandic vodka, and we're back in the mix, boys and girls. We were close on Thursday.
Yeah.
Close. We almost had a slug of it based upon the figures that I was working on. version of that. Muscle actions, flexors, extensors, yeah, whatever, right? Okay? Learning that in biomechanics. We're going straight to the physiology. Ever seen this before?
Yes.
Wendy? What is it?
It's skeletal tissue,
What?
skeletal muscle, the
Yeah, exactly.
breakdown.
And it has some parts to it. And you know them.
I don't remember all of them by heart.
I suggest that you do, okay? When we start talking about the physiology, we're going down here. Okay? So what we'll be talking about physiology-wise is at the level of the myofilaments, okay? Is all of this going back up important? Of course it is. That's why we learn it. And you should have learned it in anatomy and physiology, so go back and refresh it on this slide if you need to. So here we are. We have now come to this. What was that? From the last slide?
It's
It's
a fascicle? No, fiber?
Filaments?
The fiber?
What are you asking?
I'm asking you what this is.
It's
So
a
this is the
sarcomere.
fiber. What is this?
The myofilament?
That's the myofibril. Okay. So fiber, myofibril, and now when we're talking about what is this? Where did this come from?
The last one.
Did
Yeah.
it stay on there?
Yeah.
Kind of weird, isn't it? It's not jit-like. Okay. And so now we're at what level is this now that we're talking about here?
The myofilament?
Those are the filaments. Okay. And we're talking about filaments. What are you talking about, Lance? You're a biomechanics guy.
Actin, myosin.
Mm-hmm.
Titan? Are we talking about Titan?
We may talk about some titin, yeah. So it's important. Some other ones that are in there as well. Dystrophin, okay. But mostly we're going to be talking about these ones, myosin and actin. Okay, skeletal muscle contraction. What's this business here?
The
Sarc-
Explain it to me.
Where they're short and length.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tell me what this is. Why are there zones and bands and lines and what is this even on?
So the
Points and the in between is like the A-bands with crisscross and they go through cross bridging.
Okay, so you're saying the Z lines are the anchor points to what?
Each other.
Okay, what's anchored to them? This is Z line right here. Yes, so what's anchored to it? Get rid of these.
the
Actin?
actin? Oh, there you go.
Exactly, the actin is anchored to the Z lines. There's more, it's more complicated than that, right? So, but for this picture, they're there, okay? And so that allows us now, if they are connected to this Z line, it allows us to shorten that sarcomere. And a sarcomere is from what?
From Z line to Z line?
Z line to Z line, that's exactly right, okay? So in order for a skeletal muscle to contract, what's going to happen is those myosin heads are going to interact with the actin binding sites, contract, shorten the sarcomere. It's muscle contraction, right?
Cross
So what
bridge.
happens to these bands?
They,
They shorten and lengthen.
yeah.
Be more specific. Tell me, there's lots of zones and bands on there, what's going to happen?
The A band,
Z-line,
the M line is
closer.
where overlap.
So we just said that the Z lines
Come closer together.
are going to come together, okay? So what's going to happen?
The A band stays the same length, right?
No. Cross break
A
cycling.
band stays the same length.
I-bands look like these shortens.
Why does the A band stay the same length? That doesn't make any
Because
sense
it's
at
the
all.
myosin pulling on the actin.
That's
Each
the
end.
number of cross bridges.
What is the A band?
It's the
It's
myosin.
the myosin.
It's just the myosin, right?
Myosin.
Myosin's not changing length, right?
Yeah.
Okay? The sarcomere is changing length. So now, which one should change?
The I band.
The I band.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? It's going to come together, and so now the actin is going to be all the way covered by mostly the myelin. So from a shading perspective, it will look like it's shortening. So this is a histological representation of skeletal muscle. Here, this is what it would look like if you looked in a microscope, and this would look like it if we were looking at the molecular level of those fibers, okay? And so what you've told me is these blue lines are gonna come and be more over the top of the pink ones, and so this band is gonna change. But the A band is just the pink band. That's not gonna change. They're not changing length, right? Okay. All right, I'll buy that. Okay, I would go refresh that. Look at it a little bit again structurally, okay? Again, molecular anatomy of the myofibril, we'll go over it briefly, but we're going to get into the physiology of it, okay? So, runs the entire length of a muscle fiber, consists of repeating series of striations due to the sarcomeres. We already know what those are. Sarcomere, Z lines, I band, A band, A band, we know that. And a sarcomere is, what'd you say, Wendy?
From Z band to Z band.
Z band to Z band, Z line to Z line, right? Okay? That's exactly right. So we just talked about that in a little detail. Nice looking stuff here. We added some things. So here's our myofibril. Here is our actin and myosin here. In this case, the myosin is blue and the actin is red. A lot of other things going on here. What is this?
Mitochondria.
Mitochondria.
Why do we want mitochondria?
Energy.
What happens in the mitochondria specifically?
Aerobic metabolism.
Oxidative
Krebs
phosphorylation.
cycle.
Oh. Could you guys come up here and describe oxidative phosphorylation for me? Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3? Right now? Yeah? You want to turn around? Diagram the Krebs cycle? I'm kidding. Could you do it though? I like your confidence though. Shit, yeah. Don't turn around and do this for you right now. Okay? So that's exactly right. We just spent the whole first part of this class talking about how mitochondria provide energy for muscle contraction. So it would make sense that we want mitochondria next to skeletal muscle so that we can supply energy, ATP, to fuel this process. Okay? Now we've got some other things. This right here. It's called the sarcolemma. What is it?
Is the that's just the membrane, right?
It's just the membrane for what?
Muscle.
Skeletal muscle, right? So it's the cell membrane of skeletal muscle, sarcolemma. It's going to be important because we're going to be transmitting electrical impulses across the sarcolemma that are going to go down to the T-tubules that are going to cause the release of what from what?
Calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum.
Which one's the sarcoplasmic reticulum on this lovely picture?
Blue guy.
Yeah, so it's this blue network that surrounds each myofibril and is a vessel for calcium.